This episode is sponsored by Total Wine & More. With the lowest prices in over 30 years, always find what you love and love what you find at Total Wine & More.
Now, from high atop his desk, get ready to peel it all back and get to the root of the subject. No pun intended. With Paul K. on Wine Talks, where he takes no prisoners and calls it the way he sees it.
Welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are at an away game today. We're having a fabulous time here at Opus One winery with Michael Silacci. Is that the way you say it?
Silacci.
Silacci. With Michael Silacci. I screwed up Mario Monticelli's name yesterday too as well. But we're here at Opus One and tasting through some vintages and having just a great chat. So I wanted to get it down on tape. Available on Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, and Google Play, and all your favorite podcast hangouts. And just want to say thank you to Michael for being here. And an added bonus of tasting through 5 vintages of Opus One, which is very exciting to do. So we're going to get through that. I did a little. I see you read some things about my parents and my father and the business we're in. But I found out you went to Gilroy High School.
I did.
You're a Mustang.
I am.
So obviously everybody knows it's the garlic capital of the world, and I had a wine. Clos Lachance is still there, I think.
I think so.
There,
yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And we were talking about terroir earlier a little bit, and I could have sworn that I had a vintage of Clos Lachance that had garlic overtones. Now, is that possible?
Definitely. It's probably due to sulfides, because
sulfides,
the aroma of garlic or onion is a sulfide, and so it more than likely was that, or maybe they infused some garlic in the wine. Infused the wine with garlic. It's probably a sulfide issue.
So when you guys were in high school, was this like the garlic festival, which I know is a very big and popular thing? Was that like the place to go hang out and like be rebel rousers?
It hadn't started yet.
Oh, really?
No. No, we had other things to do.
Yeah,
we had other rabble-rousing activities to do. I grew up on a dairy.
Oh, really? Okay, so
about 7 miles east of Gilroy. So two of the great aromas of rural life, cow manure and garlic.
I know they had ice cream, garlic ice cream, and they have garlic everything.
They had garlic wine. Rappazzini did a garlic wine.
Yeah, Rappazzini, that's right.
And I wondered if they didn't have a wine that had some sulfide develop, and they thought, we should just put some garlic in this and call it garlic wine.
Well, I just thought maybe with the smoke, how smoke taints sometimes, of course, that's sort of a sooty thing that lands on the grapes. And I just thought, wow, maybe the garlic the fusion in the air, it lands on the grapes, and probably not.
Probably not, yeah.
So tell me how a Mustang gets to be just in the wine business originally and then ends up at Opus One.
I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I saw older siblings of my friends that had gone off to college, got a degree, got a job, hated their job, and then went back to school. And so I decided I wasn't going to go to university until I found what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I started traveling. I headed to Japan, to the east, far east, and stopped off in Hawaii for a weekend, ended up going to Maui and camping on a beach for 3 months. Then continued to Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, etc. Just made my way through to Southeast Asia and then across to Europe. And when I arrived in Paris, I looked up a French woman who I'd met in Tokyo. The only French I knew was Bon Voyage.
Yeah, everybody hears this story. Everybody's got this story, right? I went to Tokyo and I looked at the French girl in Paris. Yeah, that's normal.
And she said, if you want to learn to speak French, eat well, and earn money, you should pick grapes. So I got a haircut, borrowed a car, drove out in the countryside near Nantes in Muscadet, and drove into this compound, a domain, and I just knew how to say bonjour, and I want a job. I want to pick grapes, pick
Wow.
harvest.
She taught you that exact phrase. Or,
Exactly.
Je veux travailler, no?
Oui, je voudrais faire les vendanges. And so this guy was loading sacks of sugar into the back of a van, and he made me understand that if I helped him finish loading it and deliver it, that he would help me find a job. And I got a job at picking grapes at Louis Mettereau, which ironically is he had his top wine, I think, is called Le Grand Mouton.
Yeah, Le
and
Grand
here
Mouton.
I am at a half Mouton. But I fell in love with 2-hour lunches and wine. And I did decorated perfume shops for Estee Lauder, Lancaster, and Revlon, and then went back and did some pruning and was in the cellar, and then eventually went to Davis for my general education. Got a degree, a certificate in winemaking from the University of Bordeaux. I didn't do the vineyard side; I just did the winemaking side. Went back to Davis, finished my undergraduate degree in fermentation science or winemaking, earned a master's degree in viticulture, and went to Beaulieu. And that was my first job.
That's amazing. So let's go back to France for a second. I was trying to convince my wife to let me go pick grapes for Louis Jadot or something, and you just hunker down in Bordeaux. I'm in Burgundy, but the EU. You think immigration across the world is difficult in America, but the EU is really tough. How long were you there?
On and off, I was there for over 5 years.
Really? Wow.
But I would come back and then go back. But at that time, I was in a vineyard in Cognac where I was working, and the immigration came, the police, the gendarmes, and they were asking us for papers, and I showed them my passport, and he said, "Oh, I have a cousin working in, where are you from?" And I said, "Just near south of San Francisco." "Oh, I have a cousin who's in San Francisco." We started talking about his cousin in the States, and he said, he just gave me back my passport. There were no questions asked.
That's really funny.
Whereas now I fear for so much, for our guys that are coming to work in Napa Valley.
Well, there seems to be a lot of exchange in the wine world that way. And, the University of Bordeaux, obviously one of the great enology schools, and Davis is another. And so tell me then, you decided that route, but you were also in the cellar rat, so to speak, for a little while, right, when you were there. So I see quite a difference, and particularly in Europe, I see a lot of winemakers that, one, didn't start out that way. Here you thought, okay, this sounds pretty fun. I got this good-looking Paris girl, and I'm going to go work now. And then, but a lot of these guys start out, they maybe get their medical degree, or they get their law degree, or one's an MBA that I spoke with, and they come to the wine realization later. But they were educated, but not educated in enology. Then there's the other group that just started as a cellar rat. So, and I'm not saying one path's better than the other. I'm just wondering how it just evolves that way.
Well, the medical student or those folks that you mentioned, that's what I was trying to avoid from the very beginning.
I see.
Don't go that route where I end up doing something I don't like. Wait until I find what I wanted to do. And actually, before I arrived in France, I had decided I wanted to become a kindergarten teacher because I saw so many children in the third world, and I thought, you can have a huge impact on a human's life if you are a positive influence 5 to 7 years old. And so that's why I wanted to become a kindergarten teacher.
That's amazing.
But then I stumbled on winemaking, and but you know what, Paul? Here I'm a winemaker, I'm a viticulturist, but I also am sometimes a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, I know. Well, any bureaucracy. Yesterday was a kindergarten day for me. I got so many phone calls from live, so I'm like, oh my goodness, come on, are you serious? So, but your experience too, I think, is really interesting to the extent that do you think it's that important to experience overseas winemaking? You were in Bordeaux. You worked for Mr. Winiarski. To see these different philosophies?
It's really important because perspective is essential. I think if you if your focus is too narrow or your experience is too narrow, you can't evolve that quickly. You can't appreciate other aspects of winemaking, for example. So the first year I took the cellar crew away from Napa, we went to Washington State. Mm-hmm. Easy, they do Merlot, they do Cabernet. it was a very, excuse me, dense trip.
Yes.
Like a club sandwich, one thing after another.
Yeah, right.
We left at like 4 o'clock on a Monday morning, came back Thursday morning at 2 in the morning. So it was
It was
really
an excursion of education.
Yes.
Perspective changing.
2 years later, we went to Oregon.
Oh, wow.
And they said, because I had made wine in Oregon, and they said, why are we going to Oregon? We don't make Pinot Noir. And I said, to really appreciate Cabernet Sauvignon and to make a great Cabernet Sauvignon, you have to have some experience or some exposure to Pinot.
Yes.
Better even if you've tried to make it before.
Yes.
Because it's unforgiving.
Yes, it does.
And Cabernet is forgiving.
How long were you in Oregon when you worked there?
Year and a half. I was at King Estate.
Because we went to the McMinnville Pinot Noir Festival in 1989.
The International Pinot Noir Conference?
Yeah. In McMinnville, Oregon. And it had really bad Oregon Pinot Noirs at that time. There's only like 2 houses that actually were making decent wine. That's a whole different Willamette Valley than it was then.
Yes.
But what was interesting, they had brought in all these Burgundian makers to learn this stuff. And then I started doing some more research and conversations, and this is what I was going to ask you. Part of the things I wanted to ask you is like, they started, you can't make Burgundy in Willamette Valley. You can make Willamette Valley, Oregon, Pinot Noir, right? So, and I think that's part of the original failures was they were trying to do something that wasn't there to do in the first place. And that goes back to terroir and the conversation. So, and that's interesting. You would expose your group to making Pinots as such a finicky, difficult grape, and so indicative of where it's grown. That, and I think that's a great perspective.
No, and they were reluctant. And when we went up, they thought I was, why is he doing this? We don't, this doesn't make sense.
Did they get it
they
afterwards?
Came back with an appreciation. Yes, yeah, definitely. So the Pinot Noir conference, I was there. It would have been in '93, and Andrei Chelichev had come back to Beaulieu.
Really?
And so I would be with him for a half day a week in the vineyard because I was viticulturist. And one day he said to me, you need to be making wine. You need to be able to control winemaking. And I know somebody that needs you, and you need them. So he said, I'm going to introduce you to them at the International Pinot Noir Conference. Wow. You're going to be, Dorothy and I will be there, and then I'll be with these people, and I'll catch your eye, or you catch my eye, and I'll have you come over. I'm going to introduce you to them, and then you just say hello, and then just say, well, nice meeting you, and leave. I don't want you engaging them in conversation. He was
coaching you through this?
So I did that. I left. I went on vacation in France for 3 weeks, and in those days, I never called in or checked emails or anything, but I happened to call from a payphone just to check messages because there could be things going on in the vineyard, and I had all these messages from Dorothy. You have to call Andre. You have to call Andre, and that's how that's how I got into my first winemaking position.
That's fascinating.
Winemaking and viticulture, but in Oregon.
So that was at BV.
I had been at BV.
Oh, this is at Warren's. Stag's Leap.
No, Oregon.
Oh, back in Oregon.
Yeah, King Estate. So
King Estate.
I met the people there, and that's where I went. I had a great experience there.
They're one of the early pioneers up there, the King Estates, right? Weren't they part of
really,
Bethel Heights and all that group?
Those guys were all before them.
that.
Yeah, they started in the early '90s.
Yes, right.
With a vision.
Okay, well, it's right there. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. So you worked Pinot. Chardonnay, Pinot Gris.
I worked with also Pinot at BV, which is entirely different from Oregon, which is entirely different, as you said, from Burgundy.
It's an interesting thing because when I used to go to the early tastings, and that early for me was probably the late 80s, the big trade tastings.
Yes.
And the celebrities were pouring like, Fess Parker would pour, and Dick Smothers would pour, and Richard
Raymond
Sanford,
Burr.
and Raymond would, Pat Paulson would pour,
Yes.
And it was a whole different fraternity then because they weren't celebrities there, they were wine guys, right?
Yes.
But the buzzwords back then when you tasted Pinot is very Burgundian. And you always try to compare it to Burgundy for whatever reasons, and maybe this is because it was an earlier part of the wine trade, or that's what they were trying to be. And you don't hear it as much anymore. You hear, this is Central Coast Pinot. This is what it is. This is Napa Pinot, which is different, and this is wines. Look at the Bordeaux varietals in the Central Coast now. They're hardly drinkable 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Now they've figured some things out. But it was always trying to compare, and I always wondered about that because they can't be that, right? They just can't be that.
No, and in my opinion, what changed all that was the Paris tasting. Because here you had a blind tasting with top French judges tasting Napa, and then Ridge was there as well, but Napa or California Chardonnays versus white Burgundies.
Yes.
California Cabernets versus Bordeaux. And they missed it.
Yes.
That's what put California on the map.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have here my dad's newsletter from that 1976 July newsletter. He published this. It says, what's interesting, he says, there's some quotes for some of the judges. Monsieur Oliver. He's tasting the Montalegna Chard, and he says, back in France.
Yeah.
So they didn't even get it, right?
Yeah.
But the part I didn't know, and I found this publication, here's the ranking of the Chards. Montalegna was first. Merceau was second. Chalon third. Spring Mountain fourth, and then a Beaune.
Yeah.
I mean, we dominated that, right? And then for the Reds, it was Stag's Leap, and then there were three Bordeaux, Mouton, Haut-Brion, Montrose, and then Ridge. Then another Bordeaux, then Mayacamas. I mean, we did really well.
We did well, but they were different. The vintages weren't the same. So it was, for whatever reason, how now we can critique that and say, well, it wasn't set up correctly. At the end of the day, it got the point across.
It got the point.
And then when they said, like Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, that wine was the second year they harvested fruit from that vineyard. So there's myth number one. You can't make great wine with young from young vines. Secondly, the other myth was California wines will not age. These will never age. 30 years later, they repeat the Paris tasting, and Ridge, I think, came out a point or half a point ahead of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars, but it proved that you can make great wine from young vines. The key is really balance.
That's amazing.
And secondly, that the California wines do age.
I remember reading that they did the 30 years. And so did Spurrier do that? Did he save all the vintages?
It was I think it was.
What a fascinating story that they put.
I don't remember who did it. I know.
That's amazing. So let's talk about that for a second. So that was 76, and California wine was growing. My dad's store, which he bought in 69, if you talk to Bruce Nyer, when he was the sales manager at Joseph Phelps, he would say, my job was to load up the station wagon and drive to LA and stop at your dad's store and stop at the Duke of Bourbon and stop at Wally's, and then I'd come home. And that was the sales manager's job. And that was pretty young. Dave Stair from Dry Creek, came to my dad and said, what do I do with this idea? I don't even what am I doing here? Really? and Jim Barrett was our neighbor. He used to come in all the time. And then my dad tells me in a recent conversation, oh, by the way, Warren slept in your brother's room. I go, what do you mean he slept in I was maybe 16. So next door to me in my brother's room, one night I guess Warren was there on a visit to LA, and he slept in their house. But so what I'm finding interesting is this. Opus was founded in 1979. And that's only 3 years after really the accolade of, it's kind of like if a restaurant gets a Michelin star, all of a sudden there's traffic there.
Yes.
Right? And so that happens immediately, but you can't convert a winery that fast or produce better wines that quickly or move the needle that fast. So rather risky, don't you think, to take a Bordeaux maker and blend them up with a Napa Valley maker and create a brand so early in the game?
Well, that's Baron Philippe.
Yeah.
That was his idea, initially his vision, and he wanted to. Both. If you think about Mr. Mondavis or Baron Philippe, these are people who were innovative. They tried new things. They took risks. They weren't panicking and saying, "Oh my gosh, we can't change anything. We have to continue doing it, doing it the way we've always done it." They took risks and they pushed the envelope, and it takes people like that. If you think of all the people like Warren coming from Chicago, the University of Chicago,
right? Was he an attorney? I think he was an attorney, right?
No, he was an associate. He was an associate professor in political science.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
And then you have Mr. Schaefer coming. I think he was publishing books.
Yeah.
And,
It takes risks.
You take risks.
It takes risks. Except, really, Napa Madoc, is that...
That was the first name. That was like a code name.
Is that the best they can come up with?
Code name, yeah.
So they announced that Tim Mondavi is going to be one of the winemakers. And how did that go? If you know the relationship between a French winemaker who's ingrained in tradition with the New World, winemaking techniques potentially, or mentality.
Well, Lucien Siano was in the twilight of his career. Tim had just graduated from Davis, so you have a young Californian with a seasoned French veteran winemaker, and I see the impact that Lucien had on Tim, because Tim's wines were always more the lower alcohol, higher acidity wines. I think he was greatly influenced by Lucien Siano. Mm-hmm. And then you have Patrick Leon come in '85, and Patrick was embraced places and things without limits. Because in France, you have all these regulations. You have to pick within this window. You can only have this yield for your first. Ironically, it's great to have a yield that you have to respect for your wine.
Right.
But if that's all you're picking. Yeah. But when you have let's just say the yield is 3 to 3.5 tons an acre, but you've got 6 in the vineyard, and you pick the 3 to 3.5 or 3.5 because you want to get as much as possible, and the other 6 go into your second wine, it defeats the whole purpose of controlling. Yeah, right.
Controlling the
But Patrick was, he was interested in, we can put different varieties here, although they stuck to the Bordeaux varieties here, but we don't have to worry about when to pick, or all those rules, those constraints were out the window. And I always recognized when I first started working with the two of them that if we were in like a UN type situation where we're blindfolded and we have earphones on that filter out the accents, I would have said Tim Mondavi's the Frenchman and Patrick Leon's the Californian.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Philosophically,
and then when Tim went to start a continuum, then he went to a different style of winemaking.
Yes.
So
continuum is that with a sister? Is Marcia there?
Yes, Marcia.
I think so, yeah, right.
And Margaret and Bob were Mr. Mondavi were a part of it.
Because I've interviewed with Robert Jr., and we met Marcia recently at JFK, oddly. Mm-hmm. And so we had a nice chat. In fact, she was talking about Les Amis Devant, this wine enthusiast organization for the public. My dad, started 2 chapters in the South Bay in Southern California. And I think Robert Sr. came down and spoke at least at 1 or 2 of them.
I'm sure he did. He was so open.
So do you think that, this going back to sort of the conversation about the étoile, getting a star. My daughter is a boulanger in New York, and she just earned a star. Her restaurant just earned a star. In fact, we're going to French Laundry tonight, and we didn't have reservations till yesterday because but we got them from New York, calling into Napa, right, through her chef, who worked for Thomas Keller for a long time. Open per se for him, actually. But, the restaurant was limping along, the new restaurant, and then along comes Michelin, and they get a star, and now it's packed. And so here we have California wine now hits the road map, and people want to come here. And I was reading an article about Peter Mondavi, and he was talking about the tourism and the trade and the cost of the grapes. I mean, it's almost impossible, right, to just come here and say, I'm going to buy a vineyard and start making money, right?
Yes.
You can't do it, right? In fact, I had a conversation with an Armenian winemaker, wonderful girl, Victoria Aslanian, at a winery called Armas. And she's like, it's almost impossible there now because it's becoming so popular to plant. Mm-hmm. Well, I had 60 acres in Paso. It cost me, I think, $4,000 an acre at the time, but it was $21,000 to plant it.
Yes.
So I lost my train of thought there for a little bit, but we can't come here and start this business and just from scratch. We can't put it together. It's too expensive. And Peter was saying, if grapes are $5,000 a ton or $8,000 a ton, is that what it was last year? Something like that. Cabernet and Napa.
I think the average was 8,000.
Yeah, 8,000 a ton. That forces the price of the bottle, right? You work backwards as glass manufacturing, all the right, and you got to charge $100. And so, where are we going to find the client on a regular basis, particularly in today's market, which is psycho, that's willing to spend, in your case, $350 or $400, and but even a Napa cab from a respected winery, that's $100, because we're forced to charge that because we can't buy grapes at a reasonable price, or we can't grow them at a reasonable price. And there's a really interesting concept, a really interesting approach to this, particularly in today's market, which has gotten so congested with so much junk.
But I think the key to success in what you just described is to be in an area where there's a lot of shared information, shared thoughts, shared tastings, et cetera, so that, for example, I think, almost in every negative situation, there's something positive. Mm-hmm. You just have to look for it. And you go through the denial, then the anger, and then the depression, and then you roll up your sleeves and you do something about it. You go to another level. Yeah, you go to another level. So let's say phylloxera, that forced us in Napa to start thinking about rootstock, and hey, there should be, there's a rootstock that is well suited to a droughty or a very well drained site without a lot of water, and then there's one that does well in a wetter area. So let's start putting the right rootstock in the right place. Hey, maybe we should think about the different varieties, and then you get to clones, etc. And I think that the result of what happened beginning in 1986 in Napa with phylloxera was that everyone started to share information and share knowledge. Like at Beaulieu, we had a clonal trial, and you let people taste them, and then they say, wow, I like that clone. That's a style I like. And they use that. So everyone, the level of quality is elevated for everyone because of the sharing information.
Yes.
The differences are accentuated because they've seen this will suit my wine, this clone, for example, my wine better than what I was using in the past. And you have a community or an appellation that is across the board making really good to great wines,
for sure, and
then that should support that.
So getting the consumer, it's education. I mean, obviously, a lot of it's education to do that. And so you brought up an interesting question. Something I read about. You did a test. You did a yeast test. Was that a BV where you were testing inoculated yeast or natural yeast, or testing them
Here.
And you're looking at, I think you said somebody put a piece of tape on an oak tree.
That's right, yeah. that tree right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the idea there was, if we want to make wines that express time and place, how can we deepen the expression of place? The first thing is to try to get the roots of the vines to go down deeper so that they're penetrating all the horizon. So you're not just getting roots that are 2 feet deep because you're drip irrigating, spoon feeding them every week. Then what about yeast? Why not isolate a yeast from, we have 4 estate vineyards, so we wanted to, the objective was to isolate yeast from each of those vineyards and then use that yeast to ferment the grapes, grape juice coming from that particular site. So that's what we did. And we started out, we picked from 3 a.m. until 9, and this French microbiologist came and she would go out with her little latex gloves and her bottle of, her spray bottle of ethanol and some snips, and she'd snip into a Ziploc baggie a cluster of grapes and crush them in the baggie and put them behind my office in a storage room where they would ferment. The juice would ferment.
Hey, let's take a break for our sponsor, Total Wine & More. There's always something new to try at Total Wine & More. I love this place. The other day I was in looking for a Napa Red and stumbled across the Prosecco aisle and had to buy this Prosecco that was fabulous for under $8. A great alternative to other types of sparkling wines. And then there's French Rosé at under $7, which is incredible. A huge selection of Kentucky bourbon. And with these low prices, I had to get both the wines that I was looking at. With the lowest prices over 30 years, always find what you love and love what you find at Total Wine & More. You can't buy spirits in Virginia or North Carolina. Please drink responsibly, and you must be 21 to purchase. That's Total Wine and More. Check it out. Back to the show.
Of the 50 that Ziploc baggie fermentations we had going, 35 were eliminated almost within a few days of starting because they left a residual sugar that was too high. So they
weren't strong enough to finish the fermentation.
And secondly, they were creating higher volatile acidity. So like nail polish, the aroma of nail polish, or vinegar. And then we had 15. We tasted the 15. We liked 6 of them. So that was in 2012. The next year we inoculate 6 2-ton fermenters with the same fruit, with each of the 6 yeast, send the yeast off to a lab to see if it was truly wild or not. And the results come back, and we find we have 2 wolves, 3 coyotes, and a dog.
Yeah, that's what the article I read. Now he said that.
So the wolves are pure natural yeast.
Yes.
Coyotes are like coyotes. They live in the wild, but they'll come down and have a chicken or a cat for dinner that night.
Right.
So they had allele that were in common with commercial strains, and the dog was a commercial strain that was out in the vineyard. So that's how we got our start.
Absolutely phenomenal. So,
and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This last year, 19, we finally got to 100% fermentation. 93% was fermented with our strains that we've isolated, and the 7% was with whatever came in off the grapes.
Oh, really? Okay. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole movement that I think has mixed emotions and mixed value and mixed consumer reaction, and that is natural, biodynamic, organic, dry farm, whatever buzzword you want to use, even to the point they're saying, well, you're not going to get a hangover if you drink our wines because, they're it's like, it's still alcohol, I think, right? Yeah. And I was trying to peel back, like, what is unnatural about inoculated yeast? Aren't inoculated yeast come from grapes in the first place? Aren't they isolated? Or what's unnatural about it?
Yeah, they've been selected because they will finish a fermentation.
And they can finish the fermentation. You're not going to throw away a whole harvest because you were steadfast upon making sure you use only what's in the yeast from the vineyard. But you said something along this conversation about the drip irrigation. I think that we know from the monks in Burgundy that, boy, if you get those roots down into where they belong, so to speak, or the tap roots get to where they're supposed to be, that you're going to start feeling and seeing the time and places you put it.
Yes.
So I had a conversation. I brought this up with Mario yesterday. I had a conversation with a som at. Did you know there's a restaurant at Disneyland that's $15,000 for 12 people?
No.
Yes.
Oh, in Disneyland.
At Disneyland.
I may have read that.
There's Club 33, which is you join. It's like 20, right? Whatever the number is. Yes. But then above that is this thing called 21 Royale. They book it 2 or 3 nights a week. It's maximum 12 people, and it's $15,000 seating for the 12 people.
Wow.
It's like the most expensive restaurant in like the world, right? Okay. Even more than Louis XV in Monaco.
Yeah.
So anyway. He said, he was a very bright guy, that he thinks maybe that the Napa Valley ought to look at taking maybe it's Highway 29 and saying, all right, this is the west side of the east side, and appellate it, maybe cut everything in half. That there's a distinct difference between one side of the valley and the other side of the valley, even if it's the same general, like let's say it's Oakville or whatever. You think that's got teeth?
Well, that's what they started to do. Because I was at Beaulieu when those appellations were presented. Yeah. So they had Rutherford Bench, for example, and then Rutherford, and Oakville Bench and Oakville. And that quickly became something that went from 400-foot elevation or whatever it was all the way across the valley for the strip of Rutherford and Oakville. Right. So let's just take Opus, for example. So we have 100 acres in Tokelon. Directly across the street is Tokelon. Andy Beckstroffer's across the street, which was Beaulieu before.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And then Mondavi and Dietert and McDonald. And David Howell, who's a geologist, came and studied. He's done a lot of studies with Jonathan Swinchat about appellations in wine. And he said that the Tokelon fan comes all the way across and it goes to the river here.
Based on the subs underneath.
Based on what he's looking at, I said, well, actually it goes to about here, right about here, because this is, when you dig here, you can see that there's really more of an influence of the Napa River than there is of the Tokelon fan. But the fan comes all the way here.
Wow.
So that would refute this idea that that Highway 29 divides left
I
and right.
suppose that's true. Yes.
Now, I'd be happy, if to us it doesn't really matter because we don't use the term To Kalon just in house because we call To Kalon North, To Kalon South, but our wines are labeled. They're just Opus One, and the address is Oakville.
So, but if you, that was easy for me to say. If you're looking at Bordeaux, for instance, and you've got first growth across the street from second growth, in Pauillac up to Saint Julien and those places, and they've done a great job with the romanticizing Bordeaux because of those things, and I think. Real Bordeaux enthusiasts, they as well as Burgundy enthusiasts, hang on this stuff, right? And I'm just wondering if there's value to it.
Well, so then you take it a step further and you say, okay, the K West block in To Kalon North that's different from the mid blocks, which is different from where Andy Beckstroffer's To Kalon vineyard is.
Yes.
So those are different. So do you take it down to that level? Which I think that's the direction we need to go in. Really, is not. The appellation should be vineyard designated.
Yeah.
What is go to the vineyard level?
Well, I think I would agree with that. I think what I'm learning now, and I'm doing a lot of reading. I found my dad's books, which was volumes. I think I have like 3 pallets of books because my dad set out as an academic guy, as a pharmacist, to learn this industry and understand it. And so I've been reading some of the old books published in the 50s about going backwards from that point, right? So it's a different perspective.
Yes.
Learning that, much of Burgundy was négociant, and so as well as Bordeaux back in the day. But I always found it fascinating with Burgundy that they're able to create such dramatically different wines. Same grape has to be, and across the street, one is a Premier Cru and one is not. And wow, what a difference! Even particularly when you use a négociant like Louis Jadot, who's making the wines.
Yes.
And so I think it's a fascinating subject, and I as far as the consumer's concerned, they're not all going to care. Right? I have wonderful friends that just built 2 beautiful cellars, and they have wonderful California Napas in there, California wines and Napa wines. They were learning about Bordeaux a little bit, and learning a little bit about Burgundies, but they just love their Napa cabs, which is great. And they love them because of that. It makes them feel something. So I've tried to softly sort of, hey, there's some other things out there that we might want to look at, right? Northern Italy, Piemonte, those kinds of things. Not interested really, because they like it here, which is great.
But eventually they will.
But eventually your palates change a little. In fact, I want to read you something. This is from Ernest Hemingway. He says, "As I ate the oysters with their strong taste of the sea and their faint metallic taste that the cold white wine washed away, leaving only the sea taste and the succulent texture, and as I drank their cold liquid from each shell and washed it down with the crisp taste of the wine, I lost the empty feeling and began to be happy and make plans." I go, only he could write that, right? It's so beautiful of what can happen with a nice glass of wine. Now, I was kind of hoping he'd say, it was a Sancerre or something, but he doesn't say that. He just talks about some carafe of a white wine in some bistro in Paris. And so that's why I don't have, why I want customers of mine to feel something when they drink the wine. And I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second here, because my industry is badgered with junk, and they're bringing stuff into New Jersey. I even know the path because I know the guys that do it. They bring the stuff in New Jersey, they truck it to New York, they bottle it there, and they bunch of different labels for the same stuff, and it gets sent out through Groupon and the internet and all these other clubs like mine that are not really caring. They're more interested in logistical play. How much wine can we put in the system versus what the quality is? That's the deal.
Yeah.
We've got to pump as many gallons through as we can. And I think the customers are going to get tired of this. And I highlighted this, maybe you saw the article on a website called Punch Drink. She sat with me on a Tuesday when I taste wines, and sat with me for 4 hours, and I tasted, 75 wines with her, and she was fascinated by this concept because I taste a lot of crap. But in between vendors, there was a bottle of Beaujolais, This is French Beaujolais, real Beaujolais. And it was terrible. I said, taste this. She goes, this is terrible. I said, yeah, it is. And they're probably getting like $18 for it. I said, but look who it is. And it was Saturday Night Live Beaujolais, SNL, the TV show. And I thought to myself, that's totally unfair because somebody bought it thinking, oh, I'm going to sit with my friends and I'm going to have a glass of wine and we love Saturday Night Live, so let's do this. And it's bad. It just isn't any good. And I don't think that's an experience. I don't think that I bought this on Groupon for $3 is a wine experience. So the girl from the Napa Valley Register was talking about how are Napa Valley wineries going to deal with this thing? And my attitude generally is this: wine's been around for how many thousands of years? It's probably not going anywhere.
Exactly.
It goes through cycles. Things change all the time. The internet has changed radically how we market things, and I'm not sure where I'm going with this, except that it seems to me that wine is such a different product than a widget.
It is, and we're talking about a very small percentage of all wine made at that price point. And we Opus One, we sell about 60% of our wine outside the United States in 60 to 70 countries, depending on the year. And most wineries in Napa have not even scratched the surface on that. They're content with selling their wine. It's like gravity. It's the easy flow. So there's
That's
a big market out there if you look at it from a global perspective.
You still have 25,000 cases? Mm-hmm. And I know there was an article about expanding that, and you were given the right to expand it, and you sell every drop as it is. I mean, it's hard for me to get. Just to be honest, I get like 6 bottles, mm-hmm. right? In the 80s, when you and I were growing up, having a Japanese toy was, like a cheesy little toy, right?
Yeah.
It's like junk. And then now they have fine whiskeys, they have fine beef.
Yes.
They've made the world their own when it comes to premium products. And I'm sure Opus is a huge part of that marketplace.
It's our
Do you see China headed that direction?
Yes, but it's it will. They're learning so quickly how to appreciate wine.
Yeah.
The Japanese consumer and the trade, they're so sophisticated.
But they weren't always. That's what the toy comment was
No,
about,
they
right?
weren't.
You think that,
and South Korea is not quite there yet. China is advancing very quickly in their wine knowledge.
They were YouTube there were YouTube videos of them like adding Coca-Cola. Mm-hmm. Okay, fine, I'm just playing around, but
what did we start out with?
That's true.
Wine coolers.
Yeah. Bartles and James.
I'm sorry, but everybody starts out at the same spot and then finds their way. That's why there's hope for the people you were just talking about that won't try a Barolo or whatever. Yeah, right. Eventually, they'll try something different.
When I moved my business to where I'm at now, the city had just bought all the liquor licenses and wine licenses off the street. It was 1997. They just didn't want any alcohol. And so when I came there, the chief of police says, "We don't want you. I just got done getting rid of all these alcohol licenses, but if you want to come, this is what I'm going to require you to do. No food, which meant no Doritos, mm-hmm. No beer, which meant no suitcases of beer. It meant, he said, no non-grape-based wines, meaning no Strawberry Hill.
Yeah.
And no fortified wines except premium port, which meant no Thunderbird. So they were very conscientious about what people were drinking then, but he soon became a very good customer, so it wasn't a problem. So tell me then, the future of Opus. You're considered the disruptor in one article, and you're the first solo, winemaker. I'm assuming that because there's no team here necessarily. Not sure what that meant.
So the deception is that when from 1979 through 2003, there were co-winemakers. It was Lucien Ciano and Tim Mondavi, and then Patrick Leone and Tim Mondavi. Yeah. I came in 2001, and I became part of that. We had the three of us were making wine together. I was the one that was here. I live here.
Yeah, right.
They came twice a year for a couple days.
Wow.
I was the dove. I was the director of viticulture and enology. And then when I was named sole winemaker, since then there have never been so many winemakers here.
Oh, really?
And the reason is this. I mean,
That's interesting.
Ironically, there are people who maybe were across the street at Mondavi and tasted Opus in the lab there before this winery was built, and they say they were the first winemaker at Opus.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of stories like that. There have only been Lucy Enciano, Tim Mondavi, Patrick Lewin, and myself. That's it.
That's it.
But in 2004, I started a project. I had asked the vineyard workers we taught the vineyard workers certain things, and they did it so well that they helped us to change the character, improve the quality of the fruit coming to the winery. 80 or 90% of wine quality comes from outside, and they are the ones that are the medium to get it to us. And I was on a jury. I was called in for jury duty. I wasn't on a trial, but I daydream a ton. Mm-hmm. And I was daydreaming about how these vineyard workers had increased the quality of fruit coming to the winery, and I thought about the cellar workers. There were 6 of them at the time. I thought, I know they understand the mechanisms of winemaking, but do they feel passion for what they do? So I started this project called the Winery Winemaking Team. There's 8 or 10 people in the cellar. They're divided into 2 teams. And each team has one person each from the vineyard, one person from the offices, and one person from guest relations. And the idea is this, that if we want to improve and enhance absolute wine quality, it's not just me. It's not just the associate winemaker and me or the director of viticulture and me. It takes a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And they learn to make wine. They get closer to wine. How many people come to Napa Valley? I can't remember if it's 3 or 5 million a year.
Yes,
50,000 come here. And when they come, and when they come to Opus, and when people come to Napa, especially during harvest, they smell the fermentations, and they all want to make wine.
Yes.
Well, every employee at Opus at one vintage or another will get to experience winemaking. We've had 110 non-production employees.
That's brilliant.
Go make wine at Opus One.
Absolutely brilliant.
And so that's why I say there's never been so many winemakers at Opus. Right. And I believe teams make better decisions than individuals. And so I listen to everybody. And if it makes sense, if it's all I need to do is make sure that whatever's being suggested is going to take us in the right direction, which is to make an even more finely tuned expression of time and place. Yeah. And if it does, we wrap it in.
You know, I said brilliant, which is sort of like, if it's a business idea, it's a brilliant idea, but it's not what it was for. It was to develop the passion it takes to do this, because it's not an easy business, and it's all about passion, as food is, to work this pace and to work the things you do and to try and make money. You can't do it without the passion, unless you just, and it leads me back to the marketing side of this stuff. You know, there are so many venture capitalists have gotten into this industry because they're not going to buy a vineyard, so they buy into clubs like mine and other stuff, and they're all failing. They're all paying 80 cents to get $1. I mean, the other way around, they're paying $1 to get 80 cents, and it's just not working, and it's going to change a lot of things. But I love this idea. You know, the only thing I do in my office is I have the guys deliberately break a bottle once or twice so it smells like a winery out there. That's kind of what it is.
Well, you know, I told the vineyard workers we are going to teach you how vines function, so that you will understand the why. That's the beauty of going to university to study viticulture or winemaking.
It makes a difference.
You need to know why. It doesn't mean that you should take that recipe book and follow and make the safest or cleanest wine possible. It should just allow you to understand the risk and assess the risks. And I love taking risks.
Yes.
You know, how far can you go beyond that? So I told the vineyard workers, we're going to teach you why plants do what they do.
Yeah.
So how did we teach photosynthesis? You've got a leaf, and the leaf uses rays of sunshine. And the rays of light that the plant uses are red and blue. And red and blue together, so red and blue together make purple. Our wine is more ruby, but if you have a poetic imagination license, then you can imagine there's a purple in there, and you can see that.
For sure.
Mouton has more of a purplish note, and that ties back to us. But more importantly, red represents passion and blue represents reason, and you need both to do great things in life. So when you're pruning, it's 80% reason and 10 to 20% passion. And when you're picking grapes, it's 90% passion and 10% reason, so you don't overflow the boxes.
Right.
But it's always a blend of passion and reason.
It has to be.
It has to be. Otherwise, you
go to Millbrook, New York in the wintertime and watch them prune. If you're not passionate about wine, watching these guys do this, I don't know. Yeah. I'm like, what are you guys doing there wearing dry suits? Well, it's coming on an hour. There's plenty to talk about, and I hope we can do it again. But let's run through quickly. You've got 2005, 7, 10, 15, and 16. For the listeners, tell us a little bit about each vintage, and then we'll wrap it up.
So 5 was a very moderate growing season. It was a season that allowed us to be very patient and let the fruit stay on the vine for a few more days if it needed it to develop slowly. To me, this is the most classic opus that we've made since I've been here.
It's got leather and tobacco and chocolate.
If you look at what Lucian and Tim did, and then what Tim and Patrick did, and then what happened when this winery was built, they're like different chapters in the story of winemaking at Opus One. And this was, to me, if I took all those characteristics or caricature, if I made a caricature of those three wine styles, this is it right here. This is classic Opus. 2007, low rainfall, warm year, low set with Cabernet Sauvignon. So there was a low percentage of, not low, but a relatively low percentage of flowers that became grape berries in Cabernet Sauvignon. Petit Verdot was fruitful that year, so we had to figure out a way to incorporate more Petit Verdot into the blend. Also, we had a heat spell right at the onset of harvest.
You can taste that.
I find that when you have that, it blocks the development of certain aroma compounds. Those that are more like the smell of the stem of a red rose. That herbal freshness.
Herbal character, right.
But then you have in here cherry, cassis.
Still very complex, but you do sort of sense the depth of the weather, the heat, that heat thing. Fascinating. Why did you guys go to, I mean, a lot of Bordeaux sometimes are only, like Petrus is 100% Merlot, theoretically. A lot of left bank wines are just half 50-50 or 60-40, and left bank the other way. You use all 5 Bordeaux varietals here?
We use all 5 Bordeaux varieties, but keep in mind that 80% of our vineyards are planted to Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, I see.
6.5% each to Merlot and Cabernet Franc, 6% to Petit Verdot, and 2% Malbec. So, yes,
10.
You could make 100% varietal wine, and it's going to have an authenticity, it's going to have a purity, but it may lack something. The other varieties bring to help it out. It's like a vineyard. I love making vineyard designated wines. Yep. There is an authenticity, there's a pureness to it, but they could be lacking something that you bring in by blending other vineyards.
When I stocked the shelves in 72 to 78, there were some wines from California that actually had the term 100% Cabernet on the label.
Beaulieu Vineyard.
Yeah.
100% Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, 100% Napa Valley.
Yeah. So that was a badge of honor. That's what we thought we needed. And the French have been blending forever to get approachability and long life out of the simple strokes. And here we are now making all 5 grapes here.
It's an evolution.
Yeah.
It's your customers that will refuse to taste an Italian wine.
Right, exactly.
They'll get there, and that will broaden their experience. Right. 2010, the most challenging vintage I've ever gone through. Wet spring, we left more leaves on the shoots than we normally would to take up that moisture. We had heat spells. It was like being in a keto match with Mother Nature, taking her energy and trying to channel it into something positive. My favorite vintage since I've been here.
It's very expressive.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in there.
There's so many layers to that.
And the nose is jumping out of the glass compared to the 7. Really super.
15 maybe jumping out a little bit more. It's a warm vintage. And we had a prolonged heat spell at the onset of harvest, but the wine was so intense, so expressive. that after 18 months, I was concerned about it at blending. We do our blends. We're almost finished blending now. The blending of the 2019 that will be made in its first racking in February and March. 2015, I thought, this is just a little bit too much. And so when we pulled it out of barrel, I started back blending, experimenting with lots that had been eliminated, culled out. And we added some to just give it a little bit more restraint. So it still has a real expressive character, but it's has some restraint and balance, and like you just pointed out, the finish.
Yeah, it's really so fun to taste the changes, and like you said, a presence of time and place.
Yeah.
And I say this almost every podcast, but I think it's so valid, and it comes from a young winemaker in Argentina and Armenia. Her uncle owns 2 wineries. And she said, what other product can you take halfway around the world, drop it on the table, and say, this is who we are?
Yeah.
And I think that was fantastically put. And I say it all the time, and I think that's what you have to present to the world. That's what it has to be.
You do, and you have, what are the elements of terroir? The rock, the soil, the slope, the climate, the weather, the varieties you use. What is the element that we don't often talk about? You referred to it before we started the podcast. What's the one element that ties all of those together? It's the human.
Yeah, it's the person.
And so what I hope to do is leave no footprints in the vineyard and no fingerprints on the glass. I don't want to, it's not about me, it's about this place. That's what it's all about. And so I fit in here. I've been here 19 years.
Wow.
But again, this is about me trying to interpret a place in a given time with my team, who is amazing.
And it changes every year.
But it's not us pushing it one direction or another.
Right.
It's us trying to interpret what the vines have to say in a given year.
And 16.
There was nothing out of step in that vintage. Beautiful season, no hot spells.
Very balanced.
And it's so layered. It's like a millefeuille pastry. Your daughter's a baker.
She's a boulangère, but she went to pastry school.
So she does pastries too. Yeah. So that millefeuille, all those fine layers. And as it's aging, those layers are all disappearing. And it's just, there's this evolution that it's like, I don't know, I grew up on a dairy. So when cows turn their heads, they go like this. They turn, and it's like they stop and go. And this is started out like that stop and go turning of the head.
Analysis.
And now it goes like, now they just turn their head smoothly.
Right.
It's like a ballet dancer.
It's a great analysis. It's very balanced and very smooth all the way through. It's extraordinary. Well, I don't want to take much more of your time. I think we have plenty to talk about if we get to do this again in the future. But it's such a pleasure to be here and taste through with you and hear your philosophies and what's going on out there. And looking forward to, I'm going to be back up in a few weeks, but I think, we'll give it another 6 months to a year. And
give it some time. And then next time maybe we can taste 3 different blends.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
And maybe we can taste some wine, same grapes that were fermented with different yeast.
Let's do it. Great. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.